Kelly Accetta describes herself as a truth coach and author of, among other works, How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives. That's from Westcom Press. And thank you very much, Kelly, for being with us tonight.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I gather that it is your contention that women are not terribly good at this notion of selling themselves. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, all the research points to that clear fact. We have seen women kind of have this tiara effect where they want to work hard and do their job well, and they just expect the boss to come around and dub them worthy of a promotion. And that really does not serve us as women.
I must say that this somewhat surprises me. I'm not in management, so I don't either ask or hear the answers to such questions. But I sort of thought that this was the you've come a long way, baby generation, and it's rather surprising to me that women should be thought of as shrinking violets in this regard. Are women really that unassertive? And by that I mean the women of 2020.
No, actually, and you know, not all women are anything, and neither are all men. But unfortunately, it has been shown that when men are aggressive and self-promote, it's met with a very positive reaction, and a lot of times with both male and female bosses, when women go after a raise or go after a promotion, both the male and female bosses react negatively.
Really? Is that the old men are assertive and women are pushy? Is that that old sexist rule still apply?
Unfortunately, those stereotypes still exist, and it's unfortunate because the research points to a really startling statistic that men ask for raises 4 times more often than women. And when they ask for 33% more money. And I'm not talking about differences, you know, a teacher versus an executive. I'm talking about the exact same careers, the exact same situations where we're seeing that men go after raises and promotions much more than 4 times more so than women do.
Interesting. And yet, if in fact that other part of this survey that you indicated is true, and that is to say that bosses, women as well as men, react negatively to women being assertive, then perhaps what we're seeing here, that perhaps the shrinking violet approach is nothing more than survival. If in fact a woman goes for what she really thinks she's worth and is put down for it, maybe she's better off just being a shrinking violet. I would certainly consider that a terrible circumstance, but it could well be from a practical point of view that would make sense.
Well, and that's what we're seeing, especially in the male-dominated fields of technology and you know, banking. We're seeing women entering these careers, entering these companies at a pretty equal rate as men, and then just mass exodus several years later because they just hit a wall and they're frustrated and realize that they're not going to get where they want to go. And there's also another piece of research that's very interesting that talks about when women are advocating for someone else, they actually are better negotiators for other people than they are for themselves. And it's just something that we really need to look at, and they're really doing a great job of trying to find ways to have promotions and salaries done in a much more blind way, where gender is not necessarily known.
Is this at all a generational issue? Again, and I'm dealing, of course, I guess, with what I thought was the case, which obviously so far in this conversation has not been true. I would assume, and again, this is just my own preconceptions, that the younger you are as a woman, the more likely you would be to speak up for yourself. That older women can think back to a time when the penalties for being an assertive woman were even worse than they are today. So are younger women more inclined to go for it and older women less inclined?
Well, the research shows that yes, they are. They're much more aggressive at a younger age, but it starts to fall off quite dramatically. And again, I think it goes to a frustration when women hit a brick wall and they realize that they're not able to move forward. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Having very few mentors and opportunities for mentors for women in companies. Men, typically golf is something that they can go do. Most men are more comfortable going and grabbing a drink with a male colleague after work as opposed to a female colleague. There's a lot of opportunities for men to kind of build relationships and find mentors within the executive pool, whereas women have a much harder time because there are a lot less women, standard in the executive pools. And, men have to reach down and be advocates and be mentors and be, more importantly, sponsors of the females that are in their companies in order for this to make any kind of a shift, because we have to start seeing more women get into the higher management and higher executive roles. And then we'll start seeing this gap, this pay gap that has just been so pervasive and impossible to shrink over the last 30 years. The only way we're going to do that is if the men at the upper levels start advocating and sponsoring and mentoring the up and coming talent.
Now, the assumption back in the days when the women's liberation movement first began was that once women started gaining access to the executive suite, and you would certainly, I think, agree that they have gained more access than they once had, maybe not a lot, but more, that there would spring up, just as there had always been the old boys network, for want of a better term, the old girls network. Has that not happened?
No, and again, there's just not enough women in those upper level roles. If you look at it, on a nationwide scale, great book if you want to really delve deeper into the numbers is by Dr. Sean Andrews, and The Power of Perception, Leadership, Emotional Intelligence, and the Gender Divide. She really goes into incredible details and a lot of great statistics to show that we're just not really making that much of an impact year after year. We really need to start looking at different practices to really bring the gender equality ratio up in companies and also to close that pay gap.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. Kelly Accetta, our guest. She is the author of the book, How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives. We'll learn some more about that as the evening progresses. And we'll also look at this whole question of why women, even today, still don't self-promote as much as men do. 1-866-50-JIMBO, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jimbo Hannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we've been talking with truth coach and author Kelly Accetta a bit about surveys that indicate that women don't self-promote as much as men, even in this year of 2020. Tell us some more, if you can, about this survey and other findings that might be relevant to us.
Well, they just found that overall women just lacked the confidence to self-promote compared to men. And, if you kind of go back and kind of look at how children are when they are, playing with other kids, girls and how they play, it is a lot more having to do with collaboration and cooperation, and men, it has a lot more to do with competition. And so when fast forward, now we're in the workplace, this study shows that when women are offered the opportunity for a promotion and they might not have necessarily all the qualifications, maybe they only have about 80% of the qualifications, they won't put themselves out there because they don't feel like they're ready yet. Whereas the men with only, maybe 20% of the qualifications will just go for it. They'll put themselves out there and, figure out how to make it work. So that's a big difference when you look at men and women in the workplace. And again, I'm not saying all men are like this and all women are like this.
But this is a tendency.
Exactly. Over the study of the research, this is what it showed.
Now, it's one thing if, in fact, as you say, and I want to explore this more later, that women bosses are also likely to look down on women who self-promote as compared with men. That's one issue to which we'll return. But if you're saying that women simply have the opportunity to self-promote and simply choose not to for whatever reason, whether or not it's some kind of childhood training or just a genetically based tendency, I really don't know. But I mean, if they have the opportunity to self-promote and presumably the examples all around them of the benefits of self-promoting and choose for whatever reason not to self-promote, I must confess that while I find that unfortunate, I'm a lot less sympathetic. Now, again, if they wind up paying a penalty for self-promoting, then that's a whole other category that we'll look at in greater detail. But if they're just choosing not to do what's there for them to do, then my initial reaction is, well, tough cookies.
Well, and that's, I coach women on this all the time. And it goes down to putting yourself out there. And it's unfortunate, though, because there are very talented women that are not getting promoted, which is costing the company money because, again, they're not capturing the talent that's in their own company. And so companies that have really worked towards creating a more diverse workplace, especially in the upper levels of management, they've done a great job with just having the superiors, the management over women. If there is an opening, if they simply ask the women to put their resume in there or submit their information, the women will go ahead and do it. It's amazing if there, again, I go back to sponsors and mentors. A man might be out with his boss and the boss might say, hey, you'd be great for that promotion that's coming up. But a woman just is never in that situation that gets that encouragement or that pat on the back. And so companies are finding that if they just send out an email, some companies are just sending out a mass email of saying, hey, don't forget to put yourself up for that promotion. And that's working. There's a lot of different strategies that companies are realizing that women just need that little nudge. And again, it's not that they're not competitive. They just a lot of times feel like they're not ready and they don't want to put themselves into a situation that they would do poorly. And a man, on the other hand, is just going to go ahead and tackle it and figure it out while he's doing it. So we're just different in different ways. Not that the female is less talented than the man, but we just have different ways that we want to put ourselves out there that could be detrimental for our long-term career.
Do you think that there is some kind of genetic tendency here?
I don't know if it's genetic, more so that it is. I know just from my own experience growing up as a female, if you were competitive and you were beating your girlfriends at things all the time, you just didn't get invited to go do things. Girls didn't like you to be competitive. They didn't like to be shown up. It was all about, let's all work in harmony and let's all do things together. Let's do what we all want to do. So again, I think it's more of a societal kind of upbringing as opposed to genetic.
Okay, I wouldn't argue with that. Now, I'm a geezer. And certainly that was true in my day and age, and I know any number of young girls who grew up in that environment, and some of whom have done quite well. And I would assume that since they're not here to respond, but my guess would be that they learned eventually. Yeah, I had to say the hell with it. I'm forging ahead, full steam ahead, because they simply got too far not to have done so at some point. And I'm not going to just flat out ask you how old you are, but would you say that you are on the younger or the middle or the older end of the spectrum? Because your experience, I think, is principally relevant in terms of what era this happened. I mean, there was such a thing as a sexual revolution, and a lot of it happened, I guess, around the Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan era. So was your childhood after that?
My childhood, I'm in my middle age. So I was kind of on the tail end of that. And, again, I have two grown daughters now, and I definitely have seen a shift, and it's getting better every year. Every generation is getting stronger. And it goes back to making sure that women don't hit a brick wall. I think the women in this generation are go-getters. They do have optimism. They do believe they're worth it, the same of the men in their offices doing the same job. I think all of that is true. And unfortunately, they get to this middle management rank and it stalls out. And that's where we really need to make sure that we have opportunities for women to push forward without feeling like they are being pushy or too aggressive. And it's hard to know what generation was raised with what. But unfortunately, we're seeing all across the U.S., we're seeing women, especially, like I said, in the tech industries, just falling away in droves once they hit middle management because they just don't feel like there's an opportunity to go
I'm
forward.
sure that you must have talked about all this with your daughters, and I'm wondering if they said, well, I know what you mean, Mom. When I was growing up, we all behaved the same way, or conversely, maybe they said, gee, Mom, that is so 20th century. When we were growing up, it was not like that at all. We went out there and we competed. I'm just curious what your daughters told you.
No, they actually... the same type of things that I experienced as well, they experienced. They didn't want to seem greedy when it came to a time for asking for a raise or a promotion. They didn't want to seem greedy. They didn't want to seem pushy. And I had to, coach them through that and say, the guy right next to you is going to go after it if you don't. And, so go for it. So it's, again, I've seen it not just in my daughters, but I've seen it in other young women as well. And it goes back to a confidence thing. And I think...
All right, well, we're coming up on a break here that doesn't move, so I want to come back to that notion of a confidence thing and more of our discussion in just a moment. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We're talking with Kelly Accetta, a truth coach, and we'll have her define that here in a minute. She's also the author of the book, How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives. It's from Westcom Pub Press. We had some calls for our guest at 1-866-50-JIMBO. The break intervened as I was asking Kelly about her experience with her own daughters and whether being a part of a later generation may have changed their experiences. And she was explaining that to a considerable extent it had not. And to use the phrase, it's a confidence thing. Would you please elaborate on that?
Well, the study that we were talking about at the top of the hour, it showed that even the tests that they had the men and women take with where the men and the women basically got the same amount of questions correct, the women assumed they got less answers correct. And so, again, it's just a strange phenomenon. We're still studying it, but it just seems to look at with this study that just came out that women really are underestimating their value. And that's where we have to dive in and let women know that their value is as valuable as the man sitting right next to them doing the same job.
One other thing, and then I want to start taking some calls for our guest. Kelly Accetta, again, is her name. It's one thing, of course, if you're talking about yourself. But if there are others on the line here as well, for example, to take myself as objectively as I can judge myself, I don't believe that I'm a terribly aggressive individual, but I look out for Jim. And I do so in part because there are others who depend on me to look out for Jim. And I'm not shy about doing that. And now, if let's say that you are, a single mom, let's say, did the study enter into that and the extent to which women who have others depending on their success, who might be therefore more assertive, or did that come up?
No, that didn't come up in this particular research, but there is a piece of legislation called the Paycheck Fairness Act of 2019 that is being debated right now. And if we can get this figured out, Jim, if we can get this figured out, the poverty rate for working single mothers would be cut in half if the pay gap were closed. And 2.5 million children would be lifted out of poverty. So this is no small accomplishment. We've really got to look at how we can fix this pay gap, because it really, like you said, for someone who has children depending on them, it will mean a huge difference. And also, we're living longer than men. So if we're not getting the promotions, we're not getting the raises, 4 times more likely the men are getting, on and on and on. So by the end of our career, that's where we're hitting this 80 cents to the dollar. It doesn't start out that way, but towards the end of a woman's career, it's that very, very solid gap. And we live longer and we won't have enough for retirement. So it really hits us on both sides.
All right. Let's talk to Emily in Louisville, Kentucky on the Jim Bohannon Show with Kelly Accetta. Good evening, Emily.
Hello, Jim. Hello, Kelly. First, let me say I have hit a high water mark. I made your producer laugh.
Yes, well, there you go. Well, Kathy has a great sense of humor, so I'm sure it can't be that hard.
Yes, no. Well, but I like Kathy. Mrs. Accetta, or Dr. Accetta.
Mrs. Accetta, not doctor.
The idea of women training other women and also talking about this endless need of a mentor is paternalistic. This idea that all these women need mentors, but the young men don't seem to need mentors. And if the women want to go into the work field, they better learn how to handle things. And the way to do that is to grow up like I did with brothers. I had 2 older brothers, 1 younger brother, and I could stand with the best of them, even though I was only 5 feet 3 inches tall. On the other hand, I had a lot of problems all the way through school with my bad attitude. Otherwise, I would have been called a leader.
When you say a bad attitude, Emily, I'm curious. What was it about your attitude that was quote bad, unquote?
I took advantage of opportunities. My first discussion with a teacher about my bad attitude was in kindergarten.
So in other words, you're saying that by being assertive, not overly aggressive or even nasty, right, but just being assertive, that was described as a bad attitude?
Absolutely.
All right. And one other question. I'm curious, roughly how old are you?
I am 69 years old.
Okay, all right. So not a younger person. So her experience might or might not be colored by the teachers of an earlier era. Go ahead, Kelly.
And I wish that were the case. I wish everyone had the same tenacity that I can hear you have. Unfortunately, the research shows that men do have mentorship opportunities and sponsorship opportunities that women just don't have for various different reasons. And companies are really doing a lot of work to shift that. So, again, I love your tenacity. I love your attitude. And I'm so thankful that you were able to keep that intact, even though other people said that it was a bad attitude. You knew it would serve you in the future.
One of the things that we should point out that Emily may have misunderstood part of what Kelly was saying. She didn't say that men don't need mentors. She was saying that men get them and that women often have trouble getting them. But everybody at some point, I think, needs a mentor. Wouldn't you agree, Kelly?
Absolutely.
Here's Tim in Medford, Wisconsin to join us. Good evening, Tim.
Well, good evening, Jimbo and Miss Accetta. I'm just curious, when it comes to when women finally do get that promotion, finally get all the right teachings and all the right attitudes to help get the same level of achievement that they aspire to on the same level as a man, do they, once they reach that, is there some disappointment in there? And what I mean by that is there still that attitude out there that said, for example, well, so-and-so, yes, she's talented, yes, she has the skills, but if she didn't have the figure that rivaled Dolly Parton's, well, there's no way the other guys would have given her that shot.
I'm sure the sexist attitude still exists.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sexist attitudes, unfortunately, still exist, but those are moving out the door. And, women in the workplace, it's almost 50-50 now. And, women are really a contributing force to most companies in a very strong way. So, it's not that anymore. I think women, when they get to that upper ranks, I think their peers look at them and say, they deserved it. It's not let's just throw a woman in there. That's not where we are anymore. Unfortunately, there's still some companies and still some bosses out there, but that's not prevalent.
There was a time, I think, when, we've got to get a woman. In this day and age, there are so many women to get that the women who get jobs these days get it, I think, principally because they are quite qualified. And women and men, if you're qualified, you find yourself competing against others who are also qualified. I think the notion that women are hired just because they're women, that must be 30 or 40 years old, if in fact it was ever that big a deal.
Yes, and actually, it's wonderful that companies are realizing that they can ask their headhunters, they can ask for a diverse panel of choices when looking for a new hire. Traditionally, headhunters or recruiting companies would just bring a standard list of applicants that sort of mirrored their executives or mirrored the position. And now companies are realizing that if they ask for a diverse panel of options, they're also getting minorities and women along with the standard choices.
More to come. Back in a moment. We're talking with Kelly Accetta, the author of How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives from Westcom Press. More about which in a moment. As we go back to our calls, you call yourself a truth coach. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's when we have certain truths that we have in our lives. Say, I want to lose 20 pounds, and I say, I just, after having children, I'm not able to lose that weight. Well, that is your truth. It might not be true, but that's what you've adopted as your truth. So either financial, physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, all the areas of someone's life, we have certain truths. And I help people figure out if those truths are actually true and how to get to the truth that they're wanting to get to. Basically a life coach.
Very good. Yeah, it would so seem. Here's Frank in Cumberland, Maryland, to talk to Kelly Accetta. Good evening, Frank.
Mr. Accetta, you're acting as though women are still on the outside looking in. But the fact is they're winning the battle of the sexes going away. There are more women in college today than men, many more. And there are more in graduate school, law school, and I think medical school too. The only place they don't predominate is engineering. The fact is that civilization is based on the family, and the family is based on the home. And every civilization divides work by sex. Women are meant to be lovers, homemakers, mothers of families, and families are the basis of civilization.
All right, very good. We have your points, Frank, and we will examine them. We'll come back to that latter part in a second here. But first, the part about women are winning the battle. It would seem from what Ms. Accetta has said and what I've read elsewhere that at the entry point, in school, yes, they are, and maybe in the initial employment phase. I gather what you've been talking about is the promotion to the upper levels of a given career, where the glass ceiling still kicks in. Would that be correct, Kelly?
Yes, that's correct.
And then we have, of course, the last notion that I suppose I could have almost anticipated. Your place is in the home, barefoot and pregnant. Now, no, Frank did not use those words, but it's not that much of a stretch from what he said to that particular thought. So go ahead and take batting practice on that notion.
And I can let Frank rest assured that those of us that have full-time careers and raise a family do a fantastic job. I just marvel at women and how those that want to stay at home and raise children do it beautifully, and those that want to have a career and raise a family do it beautifully as well. They just do it differently, and one is not better than the other. The statistics show that the children end up doing just as well. So yes, we're not there.
Very, very good. All right. In that regard, let's talk about people who are aiming at an upper tier career. Let's talk about those who, in fact, go to law school, to medical school, who are seeking their MBA for an upper level career as a business executive. Do those schools address this notion of assertiveness?
You know, I don't know. And again, I think probably schools are very different from one school to the next. And, you know, it's funny that you mentioned lawyers. They did a research of lawyers, female lawyers to male lawyers, female lawyers that did not take any break to have children, raise children, anything like that. Equal pace in the workplace for these lawyers. And over the course of a career, a female lawyer was somewhere in the neighborhood of $450,000 less in earnings than her male counterparts. So, you know, I don't think they're addressing this in schools at all. I don't know that for sure, but I feel like women are just not prepared to when they get to that upper level. And, you know, I want to give hope to some of the women that are listening tonight, because, you know, we've talked a lot about doom and gloom and how hard it is to break that glass ceiling. But there is a strategy that is very effective, and I call it partners in promotion. And that's where another piece of research I shared with you already shows that if you're advocating for someone else, you're going to get the equal pay. Women who were advocating for other women got the same rate of pay that the men were advocating for themselves. And so finding somebody in your company that you can partner up with, and you promote her and she promotes you. Or I used to do it when I was coming up in the ranks. I had a gentleman that I recruited, I trained him, and he was my partner in promotion, and he would promote me and put me out there for different projects. I would promote him and put him out there for different projects. And we became a team that other people in the company flew in to see what we were doing. So it's a very effective strategy to incorporate into your day-to-day.
More to come with our guest, Kelly Accetta. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO on the Jim Bohannon Show, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show, 1-866-50-JIMBO. Kelly Accetta, our guest, as she has explained, a truth coach, also author of the book, How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives, from Westcom Press, as we take a call from Tom in Port Angeles, Washington. Good evening.
Hello, Jimbo. Hello, Kelly. Thanks for coming on the show. I'll be brief. What Frank from Cumberland said, he's got some insights on history in that regard. Mm-hmm. And those were the generations, my generation, Jim's generation, right, who are the last parts of it. But those are the generations that did the math, did the chemistry, did the physics, and bent the metal and went to the moon. All right? So what Frank had to say is right on the money, and we need to get back to practicing some of those elements that we had going in that culture at the same time.
Well, now, I have no problem with the fact that people, anyone who can contribute should be allowed to contribute, for example. And I don't know that there's anything to be gained by suggesting that some of you who might have a contribution to make to, let's say, going back to the moon, you go right ahead, and the rest of you go home and make babies. I mean, again, that's what it sounded like Frank was saying. Is that what you're saying, Tom?
Well, I didn't catch all of it, right? But I know where Frank is coming from on a historical perspective.
Yeah, but right? There was a lot of history that wasn't too good.
home, the whole home concept.
Yeah.
It was considered that, raising a child from birth to, the ages of 13 or 12 or 15, that was a full-time job for both people. And one of those people was out making as much money as he could and providing for a good environment for that, for that socio-cultural construct, to do its best for that child.
Right.
Whether it was a boy or a girl, or whether it was poor or rich or whatever else. As long as
what if it was the woman who was out pulling down the income and the man was a house husband and child rearer?
Well, I have that going on in my own family.
Okay.
Right now, and that's working
we
too.
We get what you're saying, and with the time that's left in the hour, I'd like our guest to have a chance to respond. We're here talking about what is perceived as a, if you will, a cultural clash, and there are those, I think, who have made the case, frankly, Kelly, that there are those who quote want it all, and that maybe wanting it all isn't really appropriate, whether you are a man or a woman. That if you're going to have children, it might be better to perhaps be less consumed by career. So I'll just toss that out there as part of the conversation.
And that is definitely a big conversation over the last couple decades. And, I've seen, like I said, I've seen women do it beautifully, especially when the husband really joins in the domestic duties or helps to pay for the domestic duties. When a woman is working 40, 50 hours a week at a job, and then she's responsible for all of the domestic duties, all of the laundry, all of the cooking, all of the shopping, all of the cleaning, all of the running around with the kids, that's where a woman can get overwhelmed. And I coach many women through this, because if the man is working 40 hours a week and the woman is working 40 hours a week, then those domestic duties should be split equally.
Maybe more men ought to be taking coaching from you.
And I do have male coaches or male clients as well. But that's just fairness. And unfortunately, I appreciate the callers that have really wanted the shift to go back to what it was, but the economy doesn't allow it anymore. Most families need two incomes to have an existence, to put kids in college. It's just unfortunately unrealistic to expect us to shift back to the way it was.
Our time has expired. Please stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Kelly Accetta, Accetta, by the way, who is the author of the book, How to Defuse the Landmines We Plant in Our Lives.